Welcome back to Big Sky Kickoff Weekend. I am Megan Robinson, joined now by two familiar faces to the Big Sky, Sam Herder of Hero Sports and Craig Haley of Stats Perform and The Analyst. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out of this busy preseason to chat Big Sky football.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's a great time of the year. We're all looking forward to it, Meg.
Guys, first thing, 9 a.m. this morning, the preseason polls for the Big Sky were released. Craig, I will start with you. Montana at the top. What were your initial thoughts on those rankings?
I thought they were solid. Their two polls are pretty similar, Meg. I mean, the top five, being the same, starting with Montana and Montana State, obviously, the big boys of the conference in recent years. I think Montana's, veteran group coming back and coming off a national championship runner-up finish warrants that number one spot. I mean, they're going to have a great year. I think it's a very solid overall ranking and very similar between the media and coaches polls.
If you look back at the last 3 to 4 years in the Big Sky, Montana and Montana State have been up there. No surprise they went 1 and 2. But then we've had Sac State, who won 3 consecutive titles in 19, 21, 22. Weber State's been in the mix. There's a lot of teams that are sort of in there. Who do you think are those teams, Sam, I'll start with you this time, that might be in contention for a playoff spot later in the season?
Yeah, I think the top five, they're all going to have really good opportunities to make the playoffs. I mean, you look at Montana, Montana State, the top two teams there, not only potential playoff teams, but I think potentially top 2, 3, 4 seeds. I look at Idaho as a team that, has a great shot at the playoffs as well. And then I think after that, it's going to get really tight. I mean, UC Davis, Sac State, certainly are going to be in the mix. I think Weber State has a chance to be much improved. Eastern Washington, I think, can be better than last year as well. You look at those top 6 or so teams, I think there's maybe a divide between the top 6 and the bottom 6, and those top 6, could be vying for 4 to 5 playoff bids.
There's always been somebody outside that top 5 that seems to push through, and sometimes there's been a champion. I mean, you mentioned Sac State. I mean, they were coming off a down year, and suddenly they shared the title in 2019. I think on paper you do have to like that top 5, 6. If you're including Weber, but I agree. There's always a team that seems to jump up. You do have some teams such as an Eastern Washington or Northern Arizona certainly was under the radar last year, going 5-3 in conference. Maybe an Idaho State with its quarterback coming back. So there's always somebody that jumps up, and you have to watch out for that in a conference that's 12 schools deep.
Craig, you mentioned there's always someone that jumps up, and oddly enough, last year that team was Montana. They were picked 6th in the coaches poll last season. They went on to win the conference. Who do you think might be this year's Montana, who we could see at the top come December?
Right away, you think Eastern Washington because, they're 8th in the coaches poll, 6th in the media. That's a program that's just a blue blood for the FCS. Keikoa Vice-Paris, we've all been waiting for him to finally put it together, and he really took big steps last year. I think the key for the Eagles would be that mid-stretch of game where they're playing the top 5 consecutively in mid-season. If you're looking for a team, I'd go that direction, but there's certainly a few contenders.
I think UC Davis is going to scare a lot of teams, and it's a program that has been on the playoff bubble the last 2 years. Last season had a really, really good argument to make the playoffs and ended up not making it in. But you look at the Aggies now, and they bring back a lot of star power. Lan Larison is not only the top player in the Big Sky, but arguably one of the best players overall in the entire FCS. Miles Hastings is a multi-year starter at quarterback, and then defensively, Rex Connors is a playmaker at safety. Zach Kennedy is a really good defensive end. So I think the talent is in place. More week-to-week consistency for UC Davis will be key, as they had some letdown games last year and in previous years. But with their overall veteranship that they have on their team, I think UC Davis could really make a push at the top of the standings.
You mentioned Lan Larison. He is also this year's Offensive Player of the Year in the Big Sky. He was last year's Offensive Player of the Year. He was a Walter Payton Award finalist. He had over 1,100 rushing yards. Craig, what do you think we can expect from the running back this season?
I think he's a deserving, preseason offensive player of the year. I mean, he won the award last year and missed, that 3-4 game stretch midseason with an injury. And that just shows you how dominant he was. Some of those weeks he just put up huge numbers and really lifted, UC Davis, almost a playoff team, as Sam mentioned. I just think he's, a threat in so many ways, and defenses are going to really struggle to stop him. Certainly a terrific player.
Sam, on the defensive side of the ball, it was Montana State's D lineman Brody Grebe who won Defensive Player of the Year preseason honors. He had 55 tackles, 13 and a half tackles for a loss last year, a team high, 10 sacks. Although the race on the defensive side for Player of the Year was a little bit closer than on the offensive side. What do you think of Grebe, Defensive Player of the Year?
Yeah, I think it was well deserved that he got the honor. Just a really disruptive guy on the edge for Montana State. He's an All-American level guy as well for Grebe. And so I think usually voters really like, total tackles is great, but usually sacks and TFLs kind of stick out a little bit more. And Grebe certainly racks those up. And so I thought he was my vote as well. There's definitely, Riley Wilson had a good argument. Elijah Ponder had a good argument as well for that honor. But I wasn't too surprised to see Grebe get that preseason honor.
What is one game this season that Big Sky fans should absolutely watch? Craig, I'll go to you first.
I mean, you're never going to get beyond Montana State as being, anything but number one game, almost in the nation, but certainly in the Big Sky. I'm actually looking at the 50th renewal of Montana and Eastern Washington, late September. It's on the red carpet. The very first game on the red carpet was Montana, back in 2010. I just think that's a huge matchup because they do struggle winning at Eastern Washington. So that game is something to circle on the calendar.
Also, the final week of the regular season, UC Davis goes to Sac State. That's another big rivalry game that always has big playoff implications. But I think an under-the-radar one earlier on in the season, I believe it kicks off Big Sky play, is Idaho going to UC Davis. I think that matchup is going to tell us a lot about both teams. We talked about UC Davis and running back Lan Larison. I think Idaho's front seven has a chance to be one of the better ones, not only in the Big Sky, but in the FCS. And so seeing that Idaho front seven going up against the rushing attack of UC Davis, I think is going to be fascinating. And two teams, like I said earlier, that should be in the playoff hunt. We get a really good early match between the two this upcoming season.
Well, Sam, Craig, thank you so much for your time, your input. Cannot wait to see how the 2024 Big Sky football season shakes out. And of course, guys, we'll be back in just a few weeks for the FCS All In Preview Show.